All right, guys, welcome back to First Team Fantasy. Sorry we're getting you this a little late, but we're getting 2 episodes here on Saturday, and I'm going to start off with the injury report. We've got kind of a lot to go through, so stay tuned. Starting off with Treylon Burks, Titans wide receiver. He's going to be out again with a knee injury, so look for a lot of DeAndre Hopkins. Miles Sanders, the Panthers running back, is also going to miss this week. He's going to be out with a shoulder. Jeff Wilson Jr. has been ruled out of this game for the Dolphins, so look for a whole lot of Raheem Mostert. Khalil Herbert, Travis Homer, and Roschon Johnson, all 3 Bears running backs, ruled out, so it's pretty much just leaving D'Onta Foreman. Also, Equanimeous St. Brown, the Bears wide receiver, is going to be out, so I guess that's just more for DJ Moore. Elijah Mitchell for the Niners is questionable with the knee. David Njoku, Browns tight end, obviously questionable with those burns, but since he played in week 4, he'll probably play here again in week 6. Also on the Browns, Cedric Tillman, rookie wide receiver, will be missing, but they're not going to have Deshaun Watson either, so that's really the big one. He's going to miss with the shoulder, even though he was apparently cleared to play. Juwan Johnson, the Saints tight end, will be out. And Tank Dell for the Texans is questionable with the concussion, has not yet been ruled out, so stay tuned with that, I guess. Robert Woods, also for the Texans, is questionable with a rib injury. So if both of them were to miss, I'd expect a very big game for Nico Collins. Mo Allie-Cox for the Colts was questionable, but he has been cleared to play, so it looks like he's good to go. T. Higgins for the Bengals is questionable with the ribs. He's kind of the scary one because we've seen him been cleared to play before last year, and he went out there for about 1 play, came out and zeroed everybody who started him. So I would really recommend not starting him regardless of his designation this week. Next, we have Demario Douglas for the Patriots and Juju Smith for the Patriots, both out with a concussion. Kind of crazy. Tyquan Thornton was questionable, but he will be activated, and they also activated Jalen Reagor from the practice squad. Marquise Brown for the Cardinals is questionable with an illness, but he's likely to play, so I think that will be all right. And Jahmyr Gibbs, once again for the Lions, has been ruled out yet another week with the hamstring. Sam LaPorta, really important one, the tight end 1 in fantasy right now, is questionable with a calf injury. It's a bit scary because he plays at 1, like in the afternoon game, and a lot of good options for him are in the morning game. So I'd almost be willing to just make that pivot now rather than have to scramble at the very end. A few more. Quez Watkins for the Eagles was put on the IR with a hamstring. Saquon Barkley is still questionable with that ankle. Gary Brightwell, another Giants running back, is questionable with an ankle, meaning it will be, but you won't want Matt Breida because they are playing the Bills. Daniel Jones has been ruled out with a neck injury, and it's just going to be tough sledding for the Giants. Also, for the Giants, their tight end, Darren Waller, is questionable with a groin injury. I just stay away from the Giants this week, to be honest.
Yeah.
Both Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, both tight ends for the Bills, are questionable. Kincaid with the concussion, Knox with the wrist. Knox is more likely to play, and that's all we have. So, as you know, there are a lot of injuries.
Yeah.
Make sure you're checking all your lineups. Make sure you have somebody to replace people who are questionable if they are not able to go. And here we go, right into the games. I'm going to start it off with the Ravens, technically at the Titans, even though it's in London, which makes it very interesting because the Ravens are 2-1 on the road and the Titans are 0-3 on the road, and this game is technically on the road for both teams. The over-under is 42. Baltimore's favored by 4.5 points. Right now, the Ravens are scoring 21.8 points per game. The Titans only 17.6. Titans have been very good against the run. We just saw Zach Moss absolutely obliterate them last week. I think that will give some hope to the Ravens running game. I guess I'd still be wary of starting any Ravens running backs in this one.
Yeah.
To make it even more complicated, rookie Keaton Mitchell got elevated to the 53-man roster and will make his season debut in this game. Excuse me. So the only real, rushing that I like on the Ravens is if you have Lamar Jackson. I think he's a good start. The Titans have not been very good against the pass this year. They're, in fact, the 27th ranked defense against wide receivers in fantasy football in a PPR setting. So, I mean, I like the Zay Flowers play this week. Realistically, I'd like to stop there. If you are in a lot of trouble with injuries, you weren't able to get guys on the waiver. If you need to go, Odell, Rashad, Aguilar. Aguilar's proved to be the most reliable so far. He even got 10 points last week in that horrible game against the Steelers. I guess you could try throwing one of them in. I'd still try to kind of avoid it. Although if there was a week, Tennessee's pass defense is the week to try to exploit that.
Yeah.
Their defense is 13th against tight ends. Even that being so, Mark Andrews, you're still starting him every week, so there's not really much to be said about that. The Ravens against the rush they are 12th against fantasy running backs. So I think it's going to be kind of tough sledding for Derrick Henry. I think, if anything, what we saw last week against the Steelers might be something similar to what we see this week, where Henry has a tough time kind of, plotting between the tackles. But the guy like Tyjae Spears, who like Jaylen Warren, they can get out, pass the ball. He's fast, shifty, so on and so forth, might have a little bit more success. Although, I mean, you have Derrick Henry, you're probably starting him. I'm not saying to start Tyjae Spears, but if you're in a pinch with running backs, he's a decent option. In each of the last 3 games, he's got more than 3 catches. And last week, he was able to score a touchdown. He's been on the field with Derrick Henry like at the same time. And also in the last game, he got 4 out of the first 7 carries. So he's getting volume. He's on the field. It's a possible option if you really need one. Aside from that, on the Titans side of the ball, you're really only starting DeAndre Hopkins. He had his kind of breakout week last week. And I think even though the Ravens have a good pass defense, being the only kind of real threat, and given that Treylon Burks is out, I think DeAndre Hopkins is a good target, or is a good start. And aside from that, I mean, if you want to go one of the kickers, Nick Folk has been great for fantasy. Justin Tucker, not so much, but I mean, he's still a decent start. And I mean, either of the defenses could be good in this one. I don't see this being a very high scoring game. I don't think will even get to the line. It could be one of those, 13-10 games. So that's really all I got for this one. If you have anything that you wanted to touch on, or
yeah, no, I mean, this one, as we get into the season and things get a little more stable, at least for certain players, you obviously Lamar, Zay, Mark Andrews. The Titans side of the ball, you're probably going to have to start Derrick Henry, D-Hop. And then I agree. I mean, we saw Justice Hill kind of eat into Gus Edwards after Gus Edwards seemed like he'd be number 1. Keaton Mitchell activated. I'd avoid the Ravens running backs. But I mean, that's really it. Justin Tucker, I hope he starts kicking field goals because, I mean, he's the best kicker in the league. But fantasy-wise, he just has not been.
Oh. Yeah, so we can go on to your next one, if that's all we got for this one.
Yeah, and that'll take us to the 49ers traveling to Cleveland to take on the Browns. The Browns' defense, honestly, one of the best in the NFL. They're first against the pass, 4th against the rush. Obviously, the Niners, no slouch on defense either. They are 2nd against the rush, 13th against the pass. But, like Schiff's mentioned, no Deshaun Watson, who will be out with that rotator cuff contusion. So we're going to see PJ Walker. That is scary for everything Browns fantasy-wise. I mean, Jerome Ford, it's a scary week. I mean, Amari Cooper, scary week. Njoku, it's a very scary week. If you have pivots for these guys, I would absolutely go there. I mean, we saw Amari struggle heavily with DTR in their last game. And I think, PJ Walker may be slightly more capable at this point than DTR. But if he is, it's not by much.
Defense.
Yeah, and it's the Niners defense. I mean, I'm absolutely starting the Niners defense, but on the Browns side of the ball, it's just tough. I mean, I guess if you're going to start one guy, it's Amari Cooper, I guess, just because of his talent alone. But like a Jerome Ford, I'm kind of pivoting away from. I just don't see them getting much done. And then, I mean, on the other side of the ball, it should be all cylinders firing. It's Brock Purdy, McCaffrey, especially if Eli Mitchell misses. It's, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle. It's just your obvious guys that you're starting every week. I would start all of them. I mean, even though the Browns are first against the pass, I could still see Brock Purdy having a very solid week just because the Browns are going to be able to do so little on their offensive side of the ball. So,
I mean, even though the Browns do have a scary defense, especially like for fantasy quarterbacks and so on and so forth, you have to remember week 4 when the Ravens go into Cleveland to play the Browns, their defense was on the field so much that it's hard at a certain point to get stops. Lamar scored 28.4 or 28.14 fantasy points in week 4 against them.
mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm not hesitating from starting my Niners, like you said.
Yeah, but I mean, that's all I really had for it. It's going to be an extremely tough week for the Browns, and on the Niners side of the ball, it should be another great fantasy week. Should be another win for the Niners.
Yeah, I don't hate the Jerome Ford start if you have to, just because he has some slight upside as a pass catcher. But like we said, there's not going to be much offensive production from the Browns, so it's kind of tough sledding.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to take us into the Colts going to Jacksonville to play the Jags. And this is a pretty interesting one. The over-under is 44. The Jags are favored by 4 points. The Colts center, Ryan Kelly, is questionable, which is kind of a big deal because if he isn't able to go, obviously that's going to affect the Colts in both phases on offense because that's your starting center no matter who the pivot is. Ryan Kelly is one of the best centers in the league. And also the Colts are 2-0 on the road. The Jags are 1-2 at home. Just another interesting tidbit. The Colts are scoring 24 points per game. The Jags 21. I think that this is going to be a pretty good offensive showdown. The first time that the Colts and Jags played, it was Trevor Lawrence's best game fantasy-wise so far. He scored 21.7 points, and which isn't very high, but for it's the best game we've seen out of him. So I think he will look to replicate that at home this week. Also, we saw the big week from Calvin Ridley. Zay Jones had that big week. Zay Jones won't be playing this week, though. So I think with what we've seen out of Christian Kirk, you can go to expect more from that. This week, he's probably going to get a large amount of the targets. And as well as him, Evan Ingram. I think Evan Ingram's going to continue to be a solid option. And the Colts are 24th against the quarterback position in fantasy, which, like I said, I have a lot of hope for Trevor Lawrence this week. I think you're starting him. You're starting your pass catchers in Jacksonville. As far as the Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss thing, I think if you have Zach Moss, it's safe to start him this week. I don't think I'm necessarily shying away from that. Given what we saw from him last week, he's still a capable running back, and they're probably going to, continue to work Jonathan Taylor in, but I don't know. It's hard to say that they'll ramp him up like right away, especially after what we saw last week. So I think Zach Moss is a safe start. Jonathan Taylor, if you want to throw him in, we know the skill that he has. He can break for a touchdown for 60 yards on a screen pass. So I don't hate that start at all, but just know that the snaps are probably going to be limited. Obviously, Josh Downs has been getting it done. If you need to flex him, I really like that. Yeah. He's been solid. He got it done with Gardner Minshew against the Ravens as well. And obviously you're starting Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is also one that had a very good week. I think his best week actually in fantasy was week 1 against the Jaguars, and where he scored 23.7 points. So, I mean, all your guys that you have on either of these. Oh, and also Travis Etienne, week 1 against the Colts, scored 21.4 points.
Yeah.
So that's a very good week for a running back. No matter who you have on the Colts or the Jags, the main pass catchers, obviously the running backs, the tight ends on the Colts, I'm still not really looking at.
Yeah.
But, I think you're rolling your guys in this one. I'm not too scared of either of these defenses, and it should be a good game for all of the fantasy assets.
Yeah, I mean, only one comment. For owners that have Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss, who would you roll?
I'd probably prefer the Zach until I see it change. I would prefer Zach Moss just because I know that they feel comfortable feeding him a lot. And just until I see that change. And then once, obviously, you see the rock get handed over to Jonathan Taylor more, you're going to go to JT. Zach Moss just becomes a good handcuff option. But for now, I'd say Moss.
Yeah, and Zach Moss has been efficient enough. When that change does come, I assume it's going to be, a 55-45 or a 60-40, the game where it starts to shift. I don't think we're just going to see Zach Moss get 5% of snaps and JT gets everything right away. at
Well, he's
least while
done
they're
too well
integrating
for
him.
them. He's
Yeah.
done too well for them. They're not. I mean, that's not like rewarding him. It's just the dude's been efficient. So why are we just going to take him off the field if we can have two good running backs? The committee thing is not a surprise. You're seeing more and more teams do it and work less away from the true workhorse role, which it keeps your guys healthy. So I don't hate it.
Yeah, and that's going to take us to our next game, which is the Commanders traveling to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. This one is very interesting to me. The Falcons are they're a solid defense, especially against the pass. They're 8th in the league. The Commanders are 21st against pass and 24th against rush. So their defense has not been anything to write home about. We saw Justin Fields absolutely torch him. By no means is Desmond Ridder Justin Fields, but just a reference, the Bears, offense had been struggling very heavily, and they were able to just turn it on against the Commanders.
Well, to be fair, Desmond Ridder did put up 300 yards last week on a Houston defense that has been fairly stingy against the pass. So
yeah,
I don't know if that's just an outlier or, I don't think it's something we can count on a week-to-week basis, but maybe he has made that turn. Something to look for.
Yeah, and it was his best game of the season by far, if not his career. It was a very solid game from Desmond Ridder. Obviously, we're not looking at him as a viable fantasy option. Bijan, obvious start. Drake London, I'm actually liking him. I think we talked about he scored double digits in every single game except the first game.
Yeah, I think he has two
games where he hasn't. But the first game was, he had a terrible first game and everyone was kind of scared, but one thing we have seen is, Drake London gets his fair share. He's the only real receiving threat there. So I don't hate the Drake London start this week. Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. We're seeing Kyle Pitts get ramped up. He's starting to get more and more targets, but Jonnu Smith is still there. I like Kyle Pitts' upside more than Jonnu Smith. I'd like to think as the season goes on, the Falcons kind of look to get the ball in their most talented players' hands, and Kyle Pitts is obviously near the top of that list. So I don't mind the Kyle Pitts start. You drafted him high. There's a reason you'd want to start him. But then when I look at the other side of the ball, Logan Thomas is a hot hand in that Commanders receiving room or tight end room, whatever you want to call it. I like Logan Thomas. Maybe not this week, but I like him. He's very talented when he's on the field. Scary Terry is a scary start in this one. Honestly, I don't love the Scary Terry start, but I do love the Curtis Samuel start. If you're a Curtis Samuel owner and you're kind of looking for the flex, depending on what the options are, I do like Curtis Samuel. He is definitely the wide receiver 2 there. He's kind of overtaken Jahan Dotson, and we're seeing him have games where he's, at least fantasy-wise, better than Scary Terry, and we probably haven't seen the last of those games either. He's just talented. Bieniemy knows how to use him, and he's a viable option.
I'd say probably my favorite start for the pass catchers in Washington would be Logan Thomas. I think he's the safest, and I don't know, he's been doing well lately. And the Falcons actually haven't been too good against the tight end. So I think that he is a decent start.
Yeah.
We've seen them, Nico Collins only got like 6 points last week, so it might be tough for the receivers. But we'll see how it goes.
No, that's a very good point. Tight end landscape, we talk about it every single episode. It's just bare, and Logan Thomas is a favorite target of Howell, and we know the Commanders like to throw the ball, even if the Falcons are good against the pass. Again, we can see Sam Howell have success. He's not a guy I would look to start fantasy-wise this week. I think there's better options out there. Brian Robinson is a guy I do like a lot this week. The Falcons' rush defense is 15th in the NFL. We've seen him pop off and have big games, and I don't see this being a game where the Commanders go down by a lot, and we're seeing Gibson take all of those snaps because in the pass downs, Gibson's getting the looks. I think Brian Robinson's going to be heavily involved. So, I do like the Brian Robinson start.
Yeah, I do agree.
And that's all I really had for this game.
All right, that'll take us into the Panthers going to Miami to play the Dolphins, which it should be a waxing. They should hand the Panthers their 6th loss.
Yeah.
The over-under is 47.5. Miami's favored by 2 whole touchdowns. Dolphins are 3-0 at home, and obviously the Panthers are 0-5. The Dolphins are scoring 36.2 points per game, and the Panthers aren't even managing to score 20.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we know how this is going to go. Miles Sanders is not playing, so Chuba Hubbard is going to get a lot of volume in this one. So, I mean, I do like the Chuba start. The Miami defense hasn't been anything to be too afraid of. And obviously, every team pretty much they're playing against, aside from that Bills game, they're going to be playing from behind. So, I mean, I like most of the guys in Carolina on this one. You have Adam Thielen, you're starting him. Chark, Mingo, those sort of guys, Terrace Marshall, it's a bit harder if you're forced into starting them. Mingo had his best game of the year last week. I don't necessarily hate it, especially since Miami's defense, like I said, hasn't been anything to shy away from when starting fantasy wide receivers. But I'd more prefer if it's like Adam Thielen, and that's kind of it for me. And Chuba Hubbard, obviously, is a good start. The Panthers, on the other hand, are 31st against the run. There's no Jeff Wilson, no Devon Achane. I guess Salvon Ahmed has been cleared to play in this game. Everything's just pointing to a big Raheem Mostert week. So if you have him, obviously you're starting him, but I really think he's going to just have a blow-up game.
Yeah.
And then I think you already know you're starting Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa. I guess if you have to start Berrios, he's on a good offense. Like I said, I don't know for sure if they're going to have Chase Claypool play this week, but it's just a mix between Robbie Chosen and Berrios, River Craycraft, all of them, as far as the rest of the receivers in that room. So I'd kind of prefer to just stay away from them outside of the main guys. And Durham Smythe, the tight end, if you're really desperate, he's on a good offense, but he really hasn't done anything to the point where it's really considering a start in my eyes. It's really all I got for this one, if you have anything else.
No, it's very simple. I think Chuba isn't. I mean, it's tough. It just depends what your running back landscape looks like. If you had Miles Sanders and you were having to start him, I hope you picked up Chuba. And if you have to start him, I mean, it is what it is. He could have a good week just with his pass catching ability,
and he's kind of the only guy. I mean, I prefer to start him over guys like Deontay Foreman, like the Arizona running backs. I think just because he's in a position where they're obviously going to be playing from behind.
Yeah, no, and I'd agree with that. And I mean, yeah, that's really all I had for this game. That'll take us to the Seahawks traveling to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. There's not much injury designations for this game. One of the few, actually. T. Higgins, obviously the ribs. He's questionable. Schiff talked about it before. It's just one of those things where you don't want to roll the dice and have him be very, very limited in his involvement if he does play. It can just burn you. And as we get into these middle weeks of the season, losses start to really, you don't want to come by them. So on the Seahawks side of the ball, I mean, Geno, I feel like there's better options out there. I mean, just depends. If you told me you had to start Geno, I don't absolutely hate it, but I feel like there's better options. Ken Walker's a must start.
I mean, a big thing is Ken Walker's been getting most of the touchdowns in that offense, so it hasn't looked good for a lot of, DK hasn't had the huge weeks, and therefore Geno's not getting those passing touchdowns. So
yeah, and as he mentioned, I mean, DK has obviously the wide receiver one there. He's been a very viable fantasy option. He's a must start. But Tyler Lockett, I mean, it has looked very odd. We're used to seeing him be super consistent, and he's had multiple single-digit weeks. I mean, again, it just depends who you have for your flex. I still like Tyler Lockett. We can still see very good weeks from him, so I don't shy away from him, but it just depends at the flex. But again, I think that is where Tyler Lockett is at this point, is a flex. He's maybe a wide receiver 3, depending on your depth. But as weeks go on and we see the shakiness from him, I just don't know. And that's also with Smith-Njigba really not even being worked into the offense. We've seen Tyler Lockett still struggle to put up viable fantasy numbers.
Yeah, I mean, for Lock, I'd say this week I do like the Seattle pass catchers, because if coming off of that game last week against Arizona tells us anything, the Cincinnati offense has kind of found their groove again, at least to some degree. So I think they're going to be firing on all cylinders, whether or not they're actually scoring points. But if they are, Seattle's going to have to catch up, and they can't do that by just running the ball. So I think that makes even down to Jackson Smith-Njigba might be viable this week. Tyler Lockett, I definitely think, is a good start, though.
Yeah, it is worth noting. The Bengals are 11th against the pass, 31st against the rush, and it's kind of the opposite for the Seahawks. They're 30th against the pass and 6th against the rush. So, I mean, it could be a huge Ken Walker week. Again, like I said, I still do like Tyler Lockett. It's just, I mean, we just have to see. I completely agree. If they have to pass the ball, Tyler Lockett's one of their most clutch receivers. On the Cincinnati side of the ball, we saw Joe Burrow finally appear as Joe Burrow, even without T. Higgins. I like the Joe Burrow start. Again, Seahawks 30th against the pass could be a monster week for Burrow. I like Mixon just because he has no competition there. And I mean, where you drafted him, you pretty much have to start him. Jamar Chase, an obvious start. If T. Higgins does not play, Tyler Boyd finished our last game without T. Higgins, 6 catches, 39 yards. He was outshined by Trenton Irwin, who had 8 catches for 60 yards. Obviously, I'm not starting Trenton Irwin, but to be honest, even if Higgins doesn't play, I don't know about Tyler Boyd. I just don't know. We've seen it. We talked about it where even when T. Higgins misses, he doesn't necessarily explode. If T. Higgins doesn't play and you have notice, and I mean, Seattle's 30th against the pass. So if you want to roll the dice with Boyd, go ahead. But again, we warned you. We've seen him without Higgins, and it still isn't that pretty.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
I think it might be, Jamar Chase getting hyper targeted again if T. Higgins were to miss.
Yeah.
That's all you got for that one. I'm going to take it into my last morning game, which is the Saints at the Texans. This one, the over-under is 42. The Saints are favored by 1.5. And honestly, the Saints are only scoring 19.2 points per game, but they're only allowing 15.2 points per game. We just saw the Texans kind of struggle against a more stout defense last week. We saw them have problems with the Ravens a little bit. I think this is going to be one of the games where the Texans offense does have a bit of a hard time moving the ball. I mean, they're only getting 82.6 yards on the ground. I genuinely don't think it's going to be a good week for Dameon Pierce. If you have other options, there are some I like more. Chances are you do have to start him, and you're kind of just rolling with what you get. He seems to be getting a lot more work than he was in the beginning of the season, which we like to see if you do have Dameon Pierce. So, I mean, I don't hate the start. You just know that the Saints defense has been very stout, and it's going to be tough for them to get anything. I don't think he's going to have much scoring opportunity this week. I think, especially with the designations of Tank Dell and Robert Woods. Robert Woods, I think, is more likely to play, but even then, dealing with the ribs, it might not take much for him to go out of the game again, obviously hoping he plays the whole entire game. But I think that is just going to push Nico Collins into a greater role this week.
Yeah.
I think, he's probably going to get a large amount of targets. I'd say I like Dalton Schultz, but the Saints have been pretty good against the tight end. Even then, if you have to play him, and due to the fact that the Texans might be missing pass catchers, I think Dalton Schultz isn't too bad. On the Saints side of the ball, they're still, Derek Carr looked a little better, a little healthier last week. They're still not really going too much down the field. I mean, given when you're just destroying the other team like how they did with the Patriots last week, you don't really have to do that. But even then, I just don't know. I don't know if they'll have to this week either. I mean, we saw Alvin Kamara run the ball 20-plus times. Given the history of the Houston rush defense, I think we might see some of that again. Chris Olave has been kind of up and down. And I mean, if you have him, you're starting him, but I'm a little bit nervous. Michael Thomas, like we talk about every week, is like pretty much the most solid floor play. Yeah. Every week he's gotten within 11 and 9 points. You know what you're going to get out of him. If you have a guy that goes down, whatever the case may be, he's someone you can plug in and know what he's going to get. So that's very comfortable. Obviously, you're not starting a tight end from the Saints. That's just no one should have to go that low. But and that's really all I got. I mean, if you want to start Kamai Fairbairn, the kicker for the Texans, go on ahead. But other than that, I mean, I think the Saints defense is a good play, but
Yeah.
I would not prefer to start CJ Stroud in this one. And obviously you're not starting Derek Carr at this point.
Yeah, I know, and the Saints defense has been so stout. We're seeing them win these super low scoring games, and this could be another one where the Saints win like a 17-13, 17-6, something along those lines. So it's just scary starting people on, the Texans side of the ball. Nico Collins, obviously, if Tank Dell and Robert Woods miss, that's very safe. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's scary for Chris Olave owners when Derek Carr can't throw the ball downfield. I mean, we'll see if it's able to change this game, how healthy he is. But it's been a scary couple of weeks where the Saints have been winning football games, and Chris Olave. Yeah, so it's just scary. Michael Thomas, like he said, is the safest option. I mean, I don't really have much else other than that.
Yeah, and I think you got one more game for the morning?
Yes, I have one more game, and it's gonna be an interesting one. We have the Vikings going to Chicago taking on the Bears. This is obviously the Vikings' life as a Vikings fan without Justin Jefferson. We will see how it looks. As we touched on, Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson are out for this game, so it's going to be Donta Foreman season. On the Vikings side of the ball, Kirk Cousins, I still like the start. The Bears' defense is just so bad against the pass. They are 31st. Alexander Mattison, we're going to see, because without Justin Jefferson, is it going to be trying to rely a little more on Mattison, and is he capable of kind of taking on that workload? The Bears' rush defense is actually 11th in the NFL. They're only giving up 98 yards a game, so we'll see. The Vikings pass catchers, I'm very interested to see. We have Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, and Brandon Powell, who played 31% of snaps and saw 6 targets, 4 catches, 43 yards. We saw a season-high targets for Jordan Addison. We saw it for KJ Osborne. We saw it for Brandon Powell, who now is getting kind of thrown in as that third receiver. I don't think we're going to see any of these guys getting, a 15-target game like we saw from Justin Jefferson. The ball's going to have to get spread around more. TJ Hawkinson owners, I mean, I think this benefits you and Jordan Addison owners the most. But if you're able to grab KJ Osborne, I absolutely like that start. And Brandon Powell's a guy I'm keeping my eye on. I'm not picking him up just yet. But again, when you get 6 targets and 31% of snaps, that's a good sign. So, I mean, it very well could be a wide receiver room where all 3 of these guys are getting 6-7 targets apiece at least. So, I mean, we know the Vikings like to throw the ball. And with the running backs that they have, I think they may not have a choice other than to still have to throw the ball.
Yeah, I mean, we might see a lot of running from Justin Fields in this one too.
Yeah, and then I mean, on the Bears side of the ball, it's very easy for me. I like Justin Fields, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, Donta Foreman. I mean, the Vikings are 13th against the rush, only giving up 102 yards. He had a very solid season with the Panthers last season, where he had 203 carries for 914 yards and 5 touchdowns. The only issue with him is he does not catch the ball out of the backfield. He is not a receiving back at all. And we've seen, even when David Montgomery was there, it was still just like the Bears, Justin Fields is going to take it himself. I don't hate starting him, depending how desperate you are. If you had like Khalil Herbert, like we talked about with Miles Sanders, if that was your only other running back depth and you were able to get Donta Foreman, you have to start him, go ahead. But if I have the option, I think there's better options.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth noting that last year, I think it was, the 9 games where he got at least 15 carries. He averaged 119 yards. Mm-hmm. Talking about Donta Foreman, just an interesting thing to keep in mind. And there's not going to be anyone else there. But like I said, it could just result in a lot more Justin Fields running the ball, because as it happens, this guy was a healthy scratch up until this point. So there was clearly a reason he was not on the field. But as far as this week, I think, both of the defenses are kind of lackluster, so it should be a high-scoring affair. Mm-hmm. But as far as the long term, they said officially that it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks for Justin Jefferson, and then they're going to do another MRI one thing that's been said, and to me it really makes sense, if the Vikings, happen to lose 3 or 4 of these next 4 games, I personally think that Justin Jefferson might get shut down for the rest of the year. So having a guy like KJ Osborne, if you are lacking at a receiver spot, or if you have a guy like Darnell Mooney, or if you're holding on to Odell Beckham or somebody, we know how much passing volume is in this Vikings offense. So a guy like Powell,
he
who
could
might
be
end up as
viable.
the wide receiver 3, because we've seen KJ Osborne in that wide receiver 3 role on the Vikings have more relevance than some of these other guys that you're still holding on to. So it's just worth noting, even if that could be 4 to 6 weeks of a rental for a receiver that you might need. And given we don't know how it's going to go, it's if you need us, or if you have an extra spot or something, you might as well pick him up, and it's worth watching.
Yeah,
And
I'd absolutely agree. But I mean, that's all I had. Unless you had something else.
no, that'll be it, guys. We're going to take a break, and then we will come back with the rest of the games for the week.
Stay tuned.